Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur, Shamil. The regional alliances are changing and so are the dynamics of South Asia. Pakistan and China have been working on China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is a mega economic activity, and both countries think that this mega economic activity would be a game changer in the region. Today is an exclusive program with our guests that I'll be introducing in a while, and we'll be discussing about South Asia and the strategic stability of South Asia. We'll also be discussing the issue of Afghanistan, the role that China is playing in the region, how can the regional countries address the issue of Afghanistan. United States, after Mr. Donald Trump became the president of US, came with a strategy for Afghanistan and South Asia, how US would look at South Asia and to Afghanistan. They have increased troops over there. Through force, can we bring peace in Afghanistan, or is there a political solution for Afghanistan? How Pakistan and China are going to address the issue of Afghanistan, and what would be the strategy of Pakistan towards India, how India is looking at China-Pakistan economic corridor. India is a part of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but at the moment, India does not accept China-Pakistan economic corridor, or for that matter, One Belt, One Road. That is an initiative taken by China. So how would regional countries look at the regional dynamics and the politics in the region? We are going to discuss this with our guest today. Our first guest is Mr. Didier Chaudet. He is a senior analyst and independent consultant on Eurasia and South Asia, non-resident scholar of Islamabad Policy Research Institute and editing director, Center for the Analysis on Foreign Policy, France. Welcome to the program, Mr. Didier.
Thank you to have me.
Discussing about South Asia, this is your area, this is your interest. I'll start with China-Pakistan economic corridor. This is a mega economic activity, and Pakistan is looking forward to this mega economic activity. We have already started working on it. China is working on it. The rise of China and the role that Pakistan is playing in the region. Both countries are addressing different issues in the region, and both have challenges. How do you see the rise of China and Pakistan's relations with China?
The rise of China is a good thing for South Asia as a whole. From my point of view, when I look at Chinese policy in this part of the world, they are there to defend their interest, that's for sure. But they do it in a certain way. They try to find win-win relationships. They try to insist on what is best for both countries. They don't impose their point of view, but they are not there to play some sort of humanitarian role that other powers have tried to play. And most of the time when you play the humanitarian but with weapons, it never works well. The Chinese are not going that far. They come because they have opportunities, and they have opportunities to offer countries in the region. Of course, depending on the country, you will have different approach. For India, it will be a problem because India has a traditional view of great power politics. So it wants to be the great power of a South Asian region. If China arrives and brings opportunities, help, things that India itself could not bring, it is a problem for India. But for Pakistan, for Nepal, for Sri Lanka, for Afghanistan, right, it is a good thing. It is a good thing economically, and it is a good thing in terms of stability.
So do you think that if, let's say, India doesn't become a part of this mega economic activity, let's say, or the things that China is working on, do you see India getting regionally isolated? Let's say, if all these countries that you mentioned are working on a mega economic activity, how do you see India then?
India will try to do something that is actually very rational, try to counter the One Belt, One Road with another project that will be similar, with another approach that will be similar. Mm-hmm. That's what is going on the last few months. You can see the meeting between Mr. Abe and Modi in India in September, talking about building another kind of One Belt, One Road, but with the help of Japan. You have to see that Japan has been talking about such subject for quite a few months now. In another hand, you see the talk given by Mr. Tillerson. It was on October 18, 2017, in one of the main think tanks in Washington, D.C., in CSIS, on a talk about India-US relations, saying that actually They don't believe that much in One Belt, One Road, and they are very close to bring a policy that will be a parallel of One Belt, One Road. But at the end of the day, if this parallel policy is just to do another One Belt, One Road, that means bringing money to help the region, why not? If it is to oppose China, if it is to oppose One Belt, One Road, it's not only China that will have a problem with it, but Pakistan and all the countries that are already gaining from One Belt, One Road.
That's a very good point and an important point, that China, just on China-Pakistan economic corridor, has spent more than, I would say, $100 billion. So anything that would be parallel to, let's say, One Belt, One Road would also be a mega economic activity in the region. Do you think that Japan and India at the moment, or with their, let's say, cooperation or collaboration with the United States, are in a position to pump in this much money in the region?
It will be difficult because we are talking about three countries with three different approaches to the region. Japan reacts this way, the way Japan reacts in the Chinese influence in Central Asia, an area where I have also the good fortune to go regularly. They are afraid of a too strong influence from China in the region, so they also try to be there through soft power and through state-to-state relationship. But does it mean that they are eager to spend as much money? Of course not. They will have other priorities, and they are not in a vision of China that will go toward supporting, for example, India in another war with China. It will not make sense. India is much more afraid, I think, of Chinese presence in Pakistan and in the region than Japan is, and the US have a totally different approach. The US are focusing about American interests, period, and they focus on Afghanistan quite a bit right now. Whatever they say about supporting India, I think Indian analysts themselves are very clear about it. They do know that there is not a strong long-term India-US relationship. Each state is focusing on their own national interest, and the US will not give too much treasure or even more than treasure to help India becomes a great power.
You just mentioned Afghanistan and the strategic stability in the region. Pakistan and the peace in Pakistan, let's say, and China-Pakistan economic corridor, and its the way it would be successful in the future is directly linked to Afghanistan, because peace in Afghanistan would mean peace in the region. So Afghanistan is very important for China and for Pakistan. United States now has a new strategy for Afghanistan and for South Asia, though they are there for the last 16 years, longest American war anywhere. How do you see China and Pakistan looking at Afghanistan? Do you think that these both countries can address the issue of Afghanistan?
I think China and Pakistan see eye to eye, and they have been seeing eye to eye more and more the last 2 years at least. When you look at the Chinese policy toward Afghanistan, what it wants is peace in the country. When you look at Chinese foreign policy as a whole, it is very pragmatic. It didn't hesitate to cede some territories of little values to China if it means peace with the neighborhood. So we are in front of a country that sees the state's business as business. It's about to find a win-win situation. And for the Chinese, what they want to see in Afghanistan in the longer term is stability. No matter what it means in Afghanistan itself, but they do understand that you need to integrate the Taliban into the fold of Afghan politics. You cannot push away a force that have been an indigenous force for so long. If the Taliban have been able to survive, it's not thanks to any foreign support. It's because they find some people supporting them in Afghanistan itself. When we talk about Taliban, when we talk about Afghan Taliban, these people are Afghans themselves. They are sons of their own country.
Yeah.
So the Chinese have accepted that, the Pakistanis have accepted that, and not only them, but the Iranians and the Russians. Here the issue is that we have the regional countries which have all understood the same thing over time, because they understand that it's in their interest to see what is going on the ground, not to follow any kind of theory. The problem is that on the other side you have the US, part of the people in power in Kabul, and the Indians to some extent. They have all decided that this kind of peace process was not possible, and if some regional powers want this peace process, it means that they support, so to speak, the Taliban. They don't dare to target China directly. But you see the last few months how strongly and unfairly the Russians have been targeted, as if they were giving weapons to the Taliban, as if they were allied with the Taliban. The Russians, like the Chinese, like the Pakistanis, have understood that one of the main issues in Afghanistan for the region was what is called ISIS or Daesh, a group that wants to strike in Afghanistan, but also in Pakistan, but also in Iran. Right. So basically, we have a regional, an Afghan regional environment as a whole that has been understanding the same thing, and the issue is coming from an American approach that is actually a little late. The Russians have been evolving. They understand that the Taliban cannot be cast away. Right. The US want peace, but they don't want peace the way the Afghan regional environment want it, which is, from my point of view, pretty weird. You talk with Americans, they want a peace process in Afghanistan. Why not working with the Russians, the Chinese, and the Pakistanis to make that happen?
And this exactly is my question. That every country we can see, US has its own approach towards peace in the region. Mm-hmm. China, Pakistan, as you said, Iran, they have their own approach towards peace, let's say, in the region. Do you think that there would be any consensus between US and China and Pakistan about the peace process in Afghanistan? Or do you think that there would be clash, let's say, of interests in the future when we talk about Afghanistan?
Actually, it can be difficult to answer this question until you look at the bigger picture, at the Asian level as a whole. What do you see time and again? You see an opposition between great powers, an incapability between great powers to talk with each other. And it seems that because the Russians and the Chinese are in one corner, the Americans have to be in another corner. They talk about peace, except that for Russia and for China, this peace in Afghanistan is real, it is needed. Because whatever happens in Afghanistan will have an impact in Central Asia, will have an impact in Pakistan, will have an impact in Xinjiang. For people in Beijing, for people in power in the Kremlin, right, it is very important. For the Americans, they see that more as a way to struggle with Russians and with Chinese and with the desires of these powers to have a true multipolar world. So I do think that the issue here is just that, the incapability of great powers to talk with each other, and maybe a difficulty on the American side to accept that now the unipolar approach is over. In a lot of things related to Asia, things will evolve in the good way only if you talk with China. It might take time, but I do hope that you have quite a few people who are very reasonable in Washington, D.C., who will understand that over time and who will be heard by the Trump administration, otherwise by the next one.
Right. We'll continue our discussion on this point after this break. We're discussing regional dynamics and the security situation in South Asia. Pakistan and China, they have a dream of a rising Asia, and other countries in the region, they are working on China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, OBOR, development and economics. But at the same time, there is an issue of security as well. Daesh is in the region, Afghanistan is disturbed, there are terrorist organizations as well. How would the regional countries like Pakistan, Nepal, China, Iran, Russia, and Afghanistan for that matter would address the issue of terrorism and extremism, and how would this help the countries in improving their economy? We're going to discuss this after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing Pakistan-China relations and strategic dynamics in the region. We were discussing, before the break, we were discussing about Afghanistan and the security situation in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is key to the peace and stability in Pakistan. While Pakistan and China are working on China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, that both countries perceive as a mega economic activity that is going to bring peace and stability in the region, protecting CPEC is also very important, and for that, peace in Afghanistan is vital. We are joined by Mr. Andrew Small, Mr. Andrew William Joseph Small is a senior transatlantic fellow, German Marshall Fund of the United States, based in Washington, and he's an author of several books. Welcome to the program, Mr. Andrew. We were discussing about Pakistan-China relations and the regional dynamics, how United States and other countries are looking at the rise of China in South Asia. We were discussing about Afghanistan. How do you see Afghanistan as an issue? And do you think that Pakistan and China can address the issue of Afghanistan? There is a war, 16 years long war of US in Afghanistan, and still 16 years on, Afghanistan is in turmoil, it's disturbed. Political stability is also is in question. How do you see Afghanistan?
For China, Afghanistan has been an area that they've largely been willing to outsource their policy to Pakistan. They'd had a very stepped-back role. The only points in which Afghanistan has been salient to Chinese security interests are when they've either seen a geopolitical threat, as there was from the Soviet Union in the 1980s, or where there's been a very direct threat in terms of terrorist groups having safe haven there, specifically Uyghur groups having safe haven there, as there was with the Taliban in power at the end of the 90s, the turn of the millennium. In the period pretty much since 2001, you had a long period in which China was pretty much unwilling to do anything. It didn't want to see a long-term US military presence in Afghanistan, but neither did it want to see a Taliban victory. So it pretty much sat things out until the point at which you saw the US withdrawing, and since then you've started to see a much more active Chinese role, largely on the diplomatic side, and the focal point for them has really been reconciliation. Can you put a peace process together? Because that's the only way that they're able to achieve all of their interests. A US drawdown in the long term, but not too quickly, in a way that would lead to more chaos as they would see it in Afghanistan, Pakistan maintaining a central role in Afghanistan's future, but also a deal that would mean that you had a government that had sufficient control over the country and that it wouldn't turn into a safe haven for Uyghur militant groups. So that's still been China's push to try to stitch together reconciliation talks with the Taliban. The difficulties there are what they are, of course, and the situation in terms of Uyghur militant groups in Afghanistan has actually shifted in the last few years since Zarb-e-Azab, since a lot of the Uyghur groups that were active in North Waziristan have been displaced into northern and eastern Afghanistan. So in addition to the efforts on the reconciliation front, you have started to see China playing a more active, direct role in trying to take action against these groups. Even some of these stories about missions being conducted in Badakhshan. But at the same time, China, like everyone else, is trying to figure out what the new US administration is going to be doing in the region. So I think in the short term, the next few months, I think they're also going to be just taking stock, trying to figure out what the real agenda of the Trump administration is going to be. They know what they've said. They've paid close attention to the speeches and things, but they want to see what happens on the ground.
This exactly is the question, Mr. Didier, that when we say, or when the, let's say, US administration says that new policy for Afghanistan and South Asia, what do we understand from this new policy for Afghanistan, let's say, for South Asia? And do you think that China, Pakistan, and other countries in the region would be willing to, let's say, accept the new Trump administration's policy for the region?
To accept it, we need to be sure of what it will be. And there is a big question mark here. From what one can understand, more troops will be sent. The Americans are not going away. It's all fine and well, but it has been like that for quite some time now. The military option has been used for quite some time. And I'm not that sure that it has been working that well even recently. So when we talk about China, Pakistan, but also Russia and Iran, they are bringing another approach. They want a dialogue. They want a dialogue in Afghanistan. The Americans are saying that they want exactly the same thing, which will be great in practice if they were all wanting the same thing. But from what I see is that each time the Russians, in particular the Russians, who have been strongly targeted the last few months, are saying that there is a need to talk with the Taliban, that there is a need to bring them at the table of negotiation. then the US are attacking the Russians, saying that they are supporting the Taliban. This kind of accusation of support are always difficult to verify in any way. And when you look at what has been said about Iran supporting the Taliban before, I will look at that with a pinch of salt. Everybody try to be in touch with everybody fighting in Afghanistan, but to say that the Iranians or the Russians or even the Chinese will be supporting rebellion against the Afghan state, it's a little too much. If everybody wants the same thing, a political process in Afghanistan, then they need to work together. It means for the US to accept to have direct talks with the Russians, with the Chinese, to come with a common plan. Because if everybody wants peace, then normally there should be no problem. And with the support of the Russians and the Chinese, the Americans could do great things to bring peace in Afghanistan. But sometimes I get a little confused hearing diplomats in the US, in China and in Russia saying that they want the same thing and still opposing themselves that much.
Right, and this exactly is the question, Mr. Adrew, and that is that Russia, Pakistan, China, this is the general perception inside Pakistan and perhaps in the region that these three countries and perhaps Iran in the future would be working on, let's say, regional stability and addressing the Afghanistan issue. And then we have Japan, India, and US on the other side. Do you see the region divided in two groups?
Not when it comes to Afghanistan. I mean, I think there are some of these broader dynamics that are playing out in South Asia and East Asia. There's clearly something that looks a little bit more like blocks forming than was the case in the past. But there are some reasons why that still won't be the case. I still think when it comes down to it, the US and China have some relatively convergent views when it comes to Afghanistan. As I think you saw when President Trump was in Beijing, Afghanistan was one of the areas that was still highlighted even after the South Asia Policy Review outcomes were announced. Afghanistan was still an area that Xi Jinping and Trump specifically stated as an area of cooperation between the two sides. And I think there are some important areas there where the two sides do see eye to eye. I think there was a concern on China's part after the speech was made, the degree to which Pakistan was singled out, they didn't like the leaning on a greater role for India. That was certainly the case. But they were pleased that there wasn't an immediate US pullout, which they didn't want to see. They were pleased that the US maintained its commitment to reconciliation. The Quadrilateral Coordination Group, which has been the mechanism that the US, Pakistan, China and Afghanistan have been using to try to galvanize peace talks, met again not very long ago. And I think there's still a sense on China's part that there's an agenda that the two sides can work together on in Afghanistan. There are other areas in which US-China, US-India competition is really intensifying. There's significant efforts to at counterbalancing, not just on the security side, but even on some of the economic initiatives, Belt and Road Initiative, and some of the efforts that you've seen from India, Japan, and increasingly the United States to think about counterbalancing that too. But in Afghanistan, I think there are actually shared interests in finding some sort of political solution, some sort of shared interest in stability, and arguably China and the US are more closely aligned than even China and Russia when it comes to Afghanistan. I think China's actually quite skeptical about the increased Russian role that you've seen in the last period of time. They've been very encouraging of the improvements in Russia-Pakistan relations, but I think they're a little concerned that Russia may be acting as a spoiler in Afghanistan and may have some other interests at stake that aren't necessarily primarily around finding a stable solution there.
Mr. Didier, do you agree with this point that Russia can be the spoiler? Because Russia and China, they have been very vocal about it, that the solution to Afghanistan would be political and not through force. Increasing troops in Afghanistan won't help, and that hasn't helped in the last 16 years. So do you think that the interests converge on at some point?
The interests are converging, indeed, but to a point. Of course, the Russians are thinking about their own interest. They will not like, for sure, seeing the Chinese and the Americans alone running the show. They will want to be part of the solution and bring their own point of view. It has been seen elsewhere in other subjects when Russia wants to be part of a solution, it wants to be seen very clearly as part of a solution. But at the end of the day, the most important thing for Russia nowadays is to make sure that there is no spillover from Afghanistan to Central Asia. And actually, this is a fear that is shared with China. And because of this main fact, I think that for now, the Russians will not be a problem for the Chinese or for anybody else in Afghanistan. How things evolve over time, it might be a different story. For Russia, Afghanistan will be a card to play at the international stage. When they want to protect their interests elsewhere, they might want to put pressure on the US or even on China in Afghanistan or elsewhere if it means to protect their national interest elsewhere.
Right. Mr. Andrew, 16 years on, Afghanistan is still disturbed, but generally speaking, about the security in the region, we have more terrorist organizations now. We have Jamaat al-Ahrar, we have TTP, we have Daesh now, ISIS. How do you think that the regional countries, China specifically, and Pakistan, and US perhaps, can eliminate these terrorist organizations in the region? Because peace in the region is very vital to CPEC and to China's designs in the region. How do you see this?
I mean, China is still reluctant to take on a direct security role, so it's still going to be reliant on Pakistan and the United States when it comes to dealing with some of these groups directly. There's been a little bit of greater willingness to train up to conduct counterterrorism missions of their own, but if you saw even the Uyghur militant groups, China was actually relatively reliant on US drone strikes to take out the leadership of some of these groups, or the Pakistanis in their own military operations. So I think China's role on this is still largely going to be on the diplomatic and economic front with a modest security component. They've increased the provision of military aid to Afghanistan. There's a greater intelligence sharing effort that's being undertaken with Afghanistan. There's been a long-standing one, of course, with Pakistan. But I think China sees its role here as the long-term economic incentives that it can offer, including a peace dividend in Afghanistan. If there were to be a political settlement, China is the country that would swing in very actively with the sort of scale of investments that you've seen here and that you're seeing elsewhere. At the moment, China is very reluctant to be involved economically. The investments that it does have, the much heralded Ainak copper mine, is really not moving forward at all. This is an area where I think China's said to all of the different parties, if you're able to resolve your differences, then there are economic rewards that can flow. But when it comes to the specific militant groups, I think China's not going to be the actor to take on a particularly direct role in taking them on.
Right. Mr. Didier, Pakistan and China's relationship, and also since last couple of years, Pakistan and China both have been working very closely on security and on economy. The do more mantra from the US side to Pakistan, and also when President Trump in his speech said that there are safe havens inside Pakistan and that Pakistan needs to do more, and also that US administration, Trump administration expects that India would pour in more money in Afghanistan. How do you see Pakistan and US relations, and do you think that Pakistan and China are getting more closer and perhaps drifting a little away from US? How do you see these relations?
You are pinpointing here something of great importance, the fact that time and again Pakistan is used as a scapegoat. There is no other word for it, for what is going on in Afghanistan. What I do see when I go to Afghanistan and when I go to Pakistan is that on the two sides, people will remind, with some truth in both sides, that there are militant groups acting in Afghanistan against Pakistan and acting in Pakistan against Afghanistan. Now a fence is being built, and from what I understood from your military here, it is a direct response to this kind of attacks, saying that now we are fencing the border and we are making sure nobody goes in or out without more control. It takes time, it will not be perfect, but it is a direct answer to this kind of attacks. What will be great from the American side is to go beyond the blame game, to go beyond the criticism on one country and now 2 or 3 countries about what is going on in Afghanistan. It is known that, it was said to me that by one of your former ISI director about the blame game and about the double game, is that everybody is playing a double game in the region, is that only idiots will not play a double game in the region. So let's integrate that. Let's not act as if nobody is playing a double game. The US is talking with India and with Pakistan, is just fine. The Americans have been stopping a high-level fighter from the TTP, from the anti-Pakistan Taliban in 2013, who was in touch directly with the Karzai administration at the time, so-called to help peace talks inside Afghanistan. So there have been links between Afghanistan and the TPP in the past. What is the case now? We don't know. We are not in the intelligence services. We can only guess. But basically, in the whole region, you have been people playing with non-state actors. If we want to have a better environment later on, there is a need to accept to stop doing that and to give some chance to trust between the different countries in the region. And first and foremost, to stop this blame game that is not helping anybody. Pakistan is an important country that is here to stay, and Pakistan is essential if we want peace in Afghanistan. Let's move from this very fact without playing the blame game, without trying to find a scapegoat.
This is a very important point, Mr. Andrew, that blame game is not going to help any country, anybody in that region, any party. And the enemy is, the common foe is terrorism and extremism in the region. But talking about these regional security, still 45% approximately of the land in Afghanistan is still under the Taliban control. Still Jamaat-ul-Ahrar and other terrorist organizations are operating over there, though US has targeted the leadership of TTP, Baitullah Masood, Hakimullah Masood. They were targeted by the US, which helped Pakistan, but they didn't eliminate the larger body of these terrorist organizations in Afghanistan. There's a point. And that Pakistan has eliminated the larger body on the Pakistani side, though perhaps we couldn't target the leadership in Pakistan. Pakistan has launched huge military operations, Rah-e-Ras, Rah-e-Najat, Zarb-e-Azb, Rad-ul-Fasad, Operation Khyber 4 in Swat, South Waziristan, North Waziristan, Rajgal Valley. So how do you see the collaboration between Pakistan and US and Afghanistan in terms of security?
I mean, I think we are heading into a slightly more difficult phase on the US-Pakistan relationship when it comes to these questions. I think despite the points that you've made, I think there is still significant concern on the US part that various groups are still, the leadership of the groups is still able to operate out of Pakistan, and that this makes a material difference to their capacity to wage war effectively in Afghanistan. However one wants to pass the concept of a safe haven, whether it's the leadership being present, whether it's people being able to use hospitals, whether it's people having their families here. There's complexity to all of this, but I don't think the US has shifted in its view that the Kahani network, for instance, still has presence on the Pakistani side of the border, and that Zarb-e-Azb didn't definitively clear out either these fighters or the capacity of some of the groups to operate from here. So that's going to be a real point of tension. I mean, I think that's the nub of the point of tension that's going to be there between Pakistan and the US in the next period of time. There may be, as we've already seen, some efforts using intelligence sharing mechanisms to identify some leaders within these groups that maybe Pakistan is more willing to treat as expendable. We will see forms of cooperation against the groups that certainly are shared cause for concern, including the TTP, including ISIS, including groups that are of significant concern for both sides. There is also the difficulty around the fact that at the same time as one wants to eliminate the leadership of some of these groups on the US part, there's also a view that you need leaders who can come to the table for peace talks. Who is going to be a credible interlocutor? How are you going to be able to have leaders that can negotiate credibly on behalf of their movements. So there are some contradictions in these objectives. This is why I think if there is impetus behind a reconciliation initiative, it will ease some of the pressure to deal with the leadership of some of these groups. But that's the main bone of contention, I think, between the US and Pakistan at the moment.
Right. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. Mr. Didier, Chaudet, pleasure having you on the program. Mr. Henry Small, pleasure having you on the program. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Today we discussed about the strategic dynamic in the region in South Asia. Pakistan has been fighting terrorism and extremism for the last many years, and Pakistan has successfully fought the most notorious terrorist organizations in the region. Terrorism is the common foe, is the common enemy, and it is for all the countries in the region and for the US and China to work on bringing peace and stability in the region. We hope that peace prevails. Thank you for watching today's program. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.
Gateway to whole Central Asia and then to Russia as well. And in this multipolar world order, the basic ingredient of cooperation is to have prosperity, is to have connectivity, is to have prosperity and connectivity with all its manifestation. So we cannot overlook, we cannot ignore one aspect. So it is very important in this, in this era or in this period of time that all states, they need to engage with each other. And before coming back to this question, I would like to add one thing to Kamar Chima Sahab, as he just mentioned, that Indian somehow agreed US Defense Secretary to oppose CPAC, that it is going through a disputed territory. But
to make a statement in
yes,
that
make
regard.
a statement. So still we take something positive out of it, that for the first time there is a growing sense that at least Kashmir has been termed or recognized as a disputed territory. Then it means that it should be resolved.
It might be counterproductive for India in the long term.
Exactly. And then, as I just mentioned earlier, that what if US agrees with China and they put their acts and hands together with the OBOR and CPAC? So India would run out of options. And I tell you what, that eventually India would be part of OBOR. Because they would not have any other option. And then you see, India would never want to lose its leverage in this region, because the situation is going to develop in a scenario where India might lose its leverage in this region. Coming back to your question, that Afghanistan, we are working with Afghanistan. You see, China is working with Afghanistan. Russia is very much concerned about peace and stability in Afghanistan. But the negative aspect is that 16 years on in Afghanistan, US stay, they could not achieve any stability or peace in Afghanistan. And now with this, the role which has been given to India to play its due part in Afghanistan, so they are giving, Indians are, giving more air to extremism and terrorism, because it's an open reality now that they are, pumping in money for TTP and other like-minded extremist groups. And
we also see the different Indian agents that are apprehended in different areas of Pakistan. We have
exactly,
the
and then
example
US
of one in Balochistan.
And it has also been witnessed lately that US is supporting some factions of Daesh in Afghanistan. So what is the rationale of US stay over there? And that is, if it happens, it is going to be a very dangerous development for Pakistan and also for the other regional stakeholders. So it is very important for all the regional players to put their acts together and come on this one agenda, that if the region, it is a prerequisite for the whole region, that if they want the whole region to be flourished, peace and stability in Afghanistan is direly needed.
Peace and stability in Afghanistan, of course, is a dire need, but sometimes countries like one of our neighbors does not seem to think beyond, might I use the term, their nose. And they have only a certain fixed agenda, is that Pakistan should not develop to a certain extent. Pakistan should not become a game changer. Pakistan should not become a player in the region, and it should not become a strong country. Shortly, last question, Qamar Cheema, to you is, what, in your point of view, should be the very strong statements or the strong initiatives that at this moment need to be taken by Pakistan in different fields to counter the Indian narrative?
Well, I think first of all we need to look completely inward, and we need to enhance our capability in every sector so that we can actually open up to the world, and world can actually look at that this is how Pakistan is a potential market. So we need to change the world's lens towards the world must not look at only from the security lens. There are other lenses through which we should force the world to look at us. At the same time, I think we should keep consistent with this Kashmir cause, because that is the only way we can which keep on challenging India, and we keep on blaming them, and we keep on telling the world that this largest democracy is the largest human rights violator as well. And I think this is the only way we can tell the world. So we should have a consistency on this. And unfortunately, we don't have consistency on Kashmir, but we should have. And at the same time, we need to engage with everyone. And even the army chief sent a message via Afghanistan to India to talk to us. But the way Indians are not talking, because we want Indians, if the Indian wants to pass through from Pakistan to Afghanistan, talk to us. And Indians have refused, we will not talk. So we need to tell to the world the hostile environment since Modi has come up, what is happening on LOC, the things are not fine because of Modi's government in New Delhi. Fine for India, for the rest of the world, but not fine for Pakistan and for Kashmir, for in this region. So I think we need to make world understand the belligerent environment the Indian government has created, and the belligerencies they are creating because of this LOC crisis they have generated. And this is the crisis because Modi has been forced to do it, because Modi comes from RSS and he has certain domestic internal compulsions from his own party that force him to behave arrogant, behave belligerent. He's soft and open to the world. He understands the complexities of the entire international system, but he does not understand that how to behave nice with the people in Kashmir or the people with Pakistan. So I think that is what we have to tell.
But I think, Cheema Sahab, also on my perspective regarding this attitude regarding the Kashmir, I think Pakistan's government, Pakistan's forces are also making a very strong point nationally and internationally, are raising this issue on different important fora. We've seen the government talking time and again at the United Nations, at other organization level, at the OIC, which has also taken out a statement on Kashmir, on the other organizations as well. And I think in due time, if this spate of constant struggle by all forces in Pakistan continues to show the world what India is doing to destabilize the region, India will finally realize, or will be made to realize, that Pakistan is a force to be reckoned with, and they need to move many steps back now and let Pakistan prosper, let Pakistan have all that it needs to have, especially with a very important project such as the CPEC. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Yasir Masood Saab, Qamar Cheema Saab, to have given us the time, to have given us your point of view on a game-changing project. We've said it again, we'll say it again, such as the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the moment. Have a great weekend. We'll see you inshallah next week.